Welcome back, CSE 103, to part 2 of our exercise 16 favorite shows using HTML and CSS in CodePen. And in the first part, we basically did all our HTML structure. We did the headline, we did paragraphs, we did a list, an ordered list. You can see it's numbered. And we put elements here that are linked, basically text that's linked. These words basically have anchor tags wrapped around them, so they're hyperlinked. And we used a target attribute so that when we click on them, they open in a new tab or a new window. And then we put an image on here, image source, and we copied that from just an image we found on Google. We just did a copy image address, and that's how we did that. And if you're in a different browser, you might see a different name. So just make sure you're seeing an image. If you're not sure, make sure when you get back here that when you look at that image tag, this one here, you're seeing an image in there, like a .jpeg or something like that. Even though this has an extra little element in here. It says width equals 620. I bet we can change that, although that's probably something that's built into the file itself, so probably not. So I wouldn't mess with that. We'll change it with CSS. So let's go into the CSS now. We could bring this up, and what are we going to target? We're going to target the IMG. Now, you might say, well, what if we had different images? Well, you can give them IDs, you could name them different. There's different ways you could target different images on a page, but since we only have one right here, we can just use IMG. Just use IMG, and I'll use my curly braces and hit enter. And a property we're going to use here, I'm just going to put in width and a colon, and I can put a space. You don't have to put a space, but I'll put one in, and I'm going to make it like 400. Now you have to put the unit, so you have to put px. And you should put a semicolon, and there it is. And if you want to make it a little smaller, you could go a little smaller. You can make it like, 350 or something like that, or 360. I like to keep it negative, not that big. I'll make it like 360 and see how that looks. And that looks pretty good. And we could even move this aside here if we want to, but we'll do that later. But that's our first thing. And even if we want to put a border on here, we can even put a border on here if we want. But let's do some other things. And I usually like to do them in the order, the CSS, the order they show up on the page. So I would probably do the body first. So I'll keep this last, and I can even put a couple of returns here, and we can get them out later. Let's target the body, and we're going to change the font and the background color. So we're going to target body, and that's all we need. Now when you're working in CSS, we're not doing any tab things here. We're not using any Emmet shortcuts. We're just typing body and then putting curly braces and hitting enter. And we're going to give a background color. And if you start typing BAC, you'll see background color come up here. I'll put a colon. And if you want a nice kind of off-white color, you can color this any way you want. I'm going to do it this way because I've done it this way in the past. So I'm going to go to Assets, and I'll go to Colors, and I'll find a nice off-white color here. Nice ivoryish kind of color, something like that. And then I'll close this and just paste it right here. You can see I didn't put a space there, and that's okay. Make sure you put a semicolon, and there it is. It's kind of warmer. Now you could lighten it up if you need to, but I'll leave it like that for now. And that's the body. Now other things you could do in a body, we could change all these fonts to like a sans serif font, and we could do something called font family. And font family is coming up here. Notice it has a dash. And I'll put a colon, and we're just going to put some fonts here. I'm going to use Calibri because that's a real common font, and that's first choice. As a second choice, I'll use Verdana, and as a third choice, I'll use Arial, and as a fourth choice, I'll just put sans serif, and if sans serif comes up here, choose that, and then put your semicolon. So basically this cascades. It looks for Calibri. If nobody has Calibri on their system, it'll use that. If they don't have that, it'll use that. And then it'll use whatever sans serif is default in your browser. Now we can use other fonts. We can use web fonts. They have the ability to use Google Fonts in here through Assets, which we'll probably do in another exercise. But that's good for now. And you can see everything changed to this sans serif font. It doesn't have the little feet on it. So it's more of a cleaner, blockier kind of font here. That actually looks better for body copy on the web. Now we could change the size a little bit. If we wanted a little bit bigger, we could go in here and put a font size. And you could even put like a percent in here. You could do like 110% and put a semicolon, and it'll just make it a little bit bigger. And that's fine. Using percents are fine. You can use pixels, percent. So we'll just make that copy a little bit bigger there. And there's other units you could use like M's and N's, but you understand how percent works. So it's about a 10% bigger than what the default is, and I think it looks nicer now. That's the body, and I'm not going to do anything else with body. Actually, one thing you can do, let's say you want to make the margin a little bit bigger. It has like a default 8-pixel margin in here. That's the area outside of elements. The area inside an element is called the padding, but the element outside is the margin, and there's a default here. It's very narrow, and if you want to put margin, you'll see things pop up like margin bottom, left, right. You can put margins on all sides and some sides or just one side, but if you just use margin, it'll go on all sides. And instead of 8 pixels, let's do like 12 pixels. See how that looks. And you can see it moves a little bit. Let's try to double it because we did have 8, like I said, by default. So let's try 16, and then I'll make sure I put my semicolon. And you can see we got a little more space there. That looks a little nicer. And if you want to go any more, go more. I'll leave it at 16 for now. And again, I'm not changing any of the default spacing in here, but I can, but I'm not going to do that right now. So that's all for body. That means because I put it in the body element, that means everything in here is going to be affected by this. So if you want to pick out something specific, if you're like, well, I don't want that in that particular color or that particular font, maybe you want that in a nice serif font. Well, you could choose that. You can choose your H1, because right now we only have one H1 on the page. So I'll choose that, and that's how you target the H1 element. So you're targeting that element because you have an H1 up here. You're targeting that element, and I'm going to give it a color and a font. Now I'm going to do font first because you'd probably change the font first and then the color. So I'll put font family again. I'll put in a couple nice serif fonts like Georgia. Now you don't have to put bold because being a header 1 already makes it bold. Now that looks pretty nice. Now you could put something else like Garamond. You could put anything. You could even put Times New Roman, except when you put Times New Roman, because it's 3 words, you need to put it in quotes. Unless you have a dash there. So I'm going to highlight that and put it in quotes. You need to put multiple words in quotes. Sans serif has a dash, so I don't need quotes. But if I had like Arial Black or something, I'd have to put quotes around it. And then I'll put serif. And I'll put a semicolon. There it is. Now if I want to make it a color, I'll just put color. Now it's not font color. It's actually just color. And that's it. Just put color. And then if you want to find a nice like dark blue color, you can go to Assets. And I'll just get a nice deep blue. I'm using a blue because it'll contrast nice with the ivory color. So I'll use a nice deep blue here. I'll go a little lighter and see how that looks. And you could always change it. And it's copied to my clipboard, so I could close this. And I'll paste it. And I'll put a semicolon. And that looks pretty nice. Now, if we wanted to make our paragraph in a blue like that, or put a little background color, we can do that. I think that's all I'm going to do with that. And for my paragraphs, what we can do is let's change the color of the paragraphs first, and then we'll try to put it in 2 columns. So I'm going to go down here and select P, because that means all the paragraphs, because there's 2 here. Now, I'm not sure why I did that, unless it messed up something with my image down here. It messed up something here because I didn't finish off my tag here. I just wanted to show that. Because I didn't finish off my tag here, it's messing up this style. So that's why I want to put my 2 brackets here and then hit return. Now I fixed it. And I'll move this up because I almost forgot that it was down there. And inside this P selector, this is the P selector, this is the P declaration. What we're going to do is we can give it a color, and I could even copy this color, this dark blue, and make it be the same color. If I want that font to be blue, that looks okay. And if I actually want to put a background color, I'd actually do it behind the div. We didn't do the div yet. And I'll leave the blue color in there right now. But if we want to make the div have a background color, it's called container. Now, let's put container in here. I'll put it before here because container is before the paragraphs in the code anyway. So I'll put another selector here. And now to select an ID container, you can put a £. That's how you select container if it's an ID. If it's a class, it gets a dot in front of it. But we're using an ID, so you're going to say container. That's how it selects it, because it's not an HTML element. But that little £, indicates that it's an ID name. And I'm going to do the same thing, just put curly braces. And for my container, I'm going to give it a background color, same way I did for the page. And I'll put a colon, and I'll just go to Assets and find a nice light blue, very light pale to put behind there. And if you don't find something right, you can adjust it. You can even adjust the opacity if you want. There's different things you could do, but I'll just find a nice, hard to tell if these even have color. I'll just do that because that'll be noticeable for now. And I'll X out of there, and I'll paste it here. and put a semicolon, and there it is. Now that looks a little dark, but that's okay. Now what doesn't look good is the fact that it's right up against the edge of this, and that's where you do something called padding. And you'd put padding in the container. The container is the thing that wants padding in it. Don't worry about the paragraphs yet, even though you might be able to. We're going to treat the container as much as we can. We're going to put padding in here. So inside this container, I'm going to put padding, and you can, again, like margin, you could do padding bottom, left, different sides, but we're going to do all around since it's kind of all in a box right now. And I'll try maybe 12 picks and see how that looks. And that looks pretty good. It does a little bit more on the top based on how the lines break, but that looks good right now. Now, another thing we're going to do is make this 2 columns. We're going to basically make the paragraphs float. And if you go in here, you can check out how we do the float thing. This is under the CSS section. It has a couple things here, and I didn't do yet. Line height, I did color, but I just chose a color. And it says float left, and it also has a width. And it says it's needed for the float to take effect. That means you have to make it thinner inside there. So let's see what happens with that. So we're going to change the line height first. That's almost like leading, or it's almost like line spacing in Word. So we're going to use that, and then we'll put a float here and see what happens. So we got to go in here, and this is for paragraph, because we're done with the container for now. We're going to go to each paragraph. We're going to say float. We can't just put float. We have to put float, and we're going to put left, so they each float left of each other. Now, it's not really working right now because we're going to have to fix this. That's okay. We're going to do something called line height, and we'll put a colon, and we'll do 150%. See how that looks. And that's what it does. It spreads out the line spacing, and that looks okay. Now, we still have a problem here with this float thing, and we'll fix that. And if we look here, we can see that we're going to have to put a width in here, and we'll try different widths just to see what happens. And then we're also going to have to put something in our container that helps it. There's something in our container called Overflow Auto that we're going to have to put in there. And that'll basically keep it from doing what it's doing, this thing there. So if we go in container, let's just put Overflow colon, and then just put Auto and a semicolon. And already that fixes it. Now that helped the idea of what's happening there. Now that means it's containing everything inside it, but what we don't have is 2 columns yet. So what we're going to do is go to your P's. Now with this float here, we're going to go a width. Now I'm going to do it before the float. I'm going to put width. Now let's just try 50% and see how that works. If we do 50% and a semicolon. And that works okay. 50% works okay. And we could move this around a little bit to see how that works. Now one thing we're going to need here is extra space in here. And we're going to do something, we can put padding or margin to the right of this first paragraph. Now you might be thinking, well, how am I going to put space to the right of that? Well, we can do it either with margin right or with padding right, but we have to pick that paragraph. Now, how do we pick that paragraph? Well, so far we didn't do this yet, and I think I had this in the instructions earlier. We're going to give this paragraph an ID, and I'm going to put ID equals, and I'll just put first. I'll put it in quotes, and I'll type first, and it's just going to be PID equals first, just like this was div ID equals container. Now, I don't need one for the second yet because I'm not doing anything, but if I target this, then I can actually go down here in my CSS, and I'll put it right after here. I could either put the ID name first, that will work, and then hit return, so then I have that set up. Or I think I could also do P. I think I could put P here, meaning P with the ID name of first. And they'll both work. Whether you put the element name there or you don't, that'll still work. P with the ID name first, and they have to be together, not a space like that, because this would mean something inside of there. This means it's its actual name. So I'm going to do it like that, and let's just try and see if this works. What we're going to do here in first is we're going to say margin right, and again, we could use padding or margin, it shouldn't matter. And maybe I'll just do like 12 picks and see how that works. And it's a problem. Now, why is that a problem? Because this margin that's added to that is added to the paragraph, and that basically made this 50%. It put us over the 50%. It was actually working at 50% until I did that. If I take this away, if I cut this, it works. But if I put it here, it doesn't. It's because I'm actually extending over 100% of what's in there. And I'll save this, and you can see it won't work anymore. And what I'll have to do here is, now I'm not going to do all the math right now, but let's say it's going to be something like 46%. Let's see how that works. And that works. And maybe I'll even do it 45. That gives us enough room there, plus the extra the extra margin in there. And you can move this around and see how this looks. Almost looks like there's more margin. It's hard to tell at the end sometimes. And let me just see if I did 6. Experimenting here just to make sure I have it. Okay, there you can see it changed a little. So I'll put it back to 12, and that looks fine. So that looks okay. It almost looks like there's more space over here. I think that's just because of where the lines end sometimes, because it almost looks like there's space over there, but we shouldn't have that because we don't have anything that's saying, you know, put space right of there. But that's fine for now. Actually, let me put a little bit more. Let me make this 16 and see how that looks, and then see, we might have to go and adjust our percent. So that looks okay, I think. And I think the last thing we'll do here, just to end this thing, we could sit and tweak this all day, but just to end this thing, let's see if we could float this thing to the right of our list. And I'm just going to go down here and I'll put float and I'll put right to see what happens. Now if I put right, I think it's going to move it way to the right side. And let me do this. Let me get rid of that because I don't like the way that looks. Let's see if we could float the list to the left. The way floats work, they float to the side of whatever's after it. So it's not like you're saying, oh, float this image to the right side of this. It's floating to the right of whatever's after it. So if I float my list to the left of the picture, it should pull the picture up. Let's see if that works. Now, we don't have anything for our OL, but let's go down here, and we'll do it before the image. I'll just say OL, put 2 braces, and I'll just put float left and see what happens there. Now, if you don't do this, that's not a big deal. Now, we have an issue here because it's bumping right up against it, which we can fix. We can actually go to this container and put like a margin bottom, and we can go to our OL and put a margin right. You know what I'm saying? You could put a margin under this thing to push it down and put a margin here to push this over. So I'll do this one first. I'll say margin right, and I'll just put like, I'll put like 20 pixels and see how that works. And you can see that pushes it over. And let's do 20 after the container. So go find the container. I'll move this over a little bit more. Go find the container, and I'll put margin. Now that's bottom. That's going to be bottom. We're going to do it at the bottom. So we'll find margin bottom, and I'll do 20 pixels on the bottom and put a semicolon. And that works. And that looks pretty good. It's about what I want. So that's all we're going to do on here. You can do other things. You can put a border on here. We can do drop shadows. There's lots of different stuff we can do here. But again, we're just giving a little overview of what you can do with HTML and CSS. HTML is the structure, the heading, the paragraphs, the list, the links, the picture, all that kind of stuff, kind of the raw content. And the CSS is making the color. It's making the color of the background. It's changing the layout, putting this in 2 columns, putting some space in between here, putting padding in here, putting margin around the body, putting the font in a sans serif, putting this font in a serif, and even adjusting the size of the image, which we did with CSS as well. So, and the nice thing is we're doing this from a different place. We're not lumping this code all together. If you mix CSS, which you can, if you would mix all the CSS in with all this code, it just becomes a big mess, and it's really hard to find things. If you ever look at your even in your discussion forums, if you go to the source, I think I had a discussion question to have you look at the source. It gets really messy really quick, and it puts all this stuff in here, and that's the only way it does it. With real web pages, what they actually do is have separate CSS files that they link to. Now, they don't do that in CodePen. They just put them in separate panes, but in real web design, CSS will be a separate file that actually gets linked to from the HTML file, and then it just puts all these styles into place, as they call them, CSS Cascading Styles. But what we have over here is a whole bunch of declaration blocks for body, H1, container, and all these declarations in here. Some of them have just one or two. Some of them have 4, all these. And just to look at this again, here's the 4 for body. Here's the ones for H1. Here's the ones for container. Here's the ones for P. And make sure that you have your 2 curly braces for each. Here's the one for P first, or the first ID. The first paragraph there's only 1 element in there. And then even for OL, for our ordered list, we put a float left. That made the list float to the left of the picture. And our image, we made 360 pixels. Now you could have a different picture, do it different ways. Maybe you have a narrower picture that you might not have to change as much. And you could try different colors and things like that. But for that, that's good for now. Now when you're done, make sure you save. And then you can share it and copy the link down here. And then go back to my Warren, log back in, go to coursework, and for fall 2020, it's under Unit 13. I'll click on the link here, and I'll just add a comment, and I'll click on the link, and I'll paste this, and I'll choose new window. Notice it says target. Remember target. It's going to be, this will actually make target equals blank. If I hit OK here, now actually, if I go in here, my source, just to show you this, so you have a p tag, there's the aref, there's the target equals blank. See, there's all that HTML in there. There's no CSS in here unless we put some in, and I'll just hit OK. And if you wanted to just put something here, like I'll just hit return and I'll just put, this is CSS. Now what would be CSS? Well, actually, if you colored this and you made it bold and you made it red and you did something like that, and then you went in here, now you have the CSS. You have a style, span style equals. And notice there's color, there's a colon, and a semicolon. That's all CSS, except it's mixed in with the HTML, which gets really complicated and hard to read. That's why we try to keep it separate. That's why in CodePen, we keep our CSS separate. It looks a lot better. It's easier to follow over here when it's separate. In here, it's really hard to see. So I'll just hit OK here. Now, you don't need to have that. I'll just leave that in there for now. But once you have this link, and again, the link is on new window, which gives the target blank. Then you can just hit save. And you're done with exercise 16, your favorite shows using HTML and CSS in CodePen.